One NASCAR track has seen more chaos, more crashes, and more controversy than any other facility in racing history. We're talking about airborne cars flying into catch fences, drivers hearing mysterious voices telling them to quit mid-race, and a con man who somehow managed to scam NASCAR itself. This is Talladega Super Speedway, and trust me, this story is wilder than you can imagine. Welcome to Track Reactions, your source for all the stories on and off the track. Please like this video and subscribe to get the latest burnt rubber. In the early 1960s, NASCAR founder Bill France Sr. had a problem. He needed to build the biggest, fastest, most spectacular racetrack the world had ever seen. His first choice? Spartanburg, South Carolina. In 1964, France announced plans for what he called a Little Daytona, a 1.5-mile track that would cost nearly $1 million and seat 50,000 fans. Everything looked perfect on paper, but things went sideways fast. The local residents took one look at France's proposal and said, absolutely not. They were worried about noise, traffic, and basically having their quiet town turn into a racing circus. Now you might think this was just a minor setback for France, but according to longtime NASCAR driver James Hilton, this rejection was catastrophic for Spartanburg. He said the city council, quote, stuck a knife in their hearts, their own hearts, because they had no idea what they were turning down. If they'd said yes, Spartanburg would be what Talladega is today, the center of NASCAR's universe. But France wasn't giving up that easily. And that's when things got really interesting. After getting rejected in South Carolina, France turned his attention to Alabama. And this is where our story really takes off. In 1965, former driver Fonty Flock convinced France to check out the area around Anniston, Alabama. By early 1966, France was negotiating to build a $1.5 million facility near Talladega Municipal Airport. But this wasn't going to be just any racetrack. France had learned from his Daytona experience, and he wanted to build something bigger, faster, and more spectacular than anything the racing world had ever seen. The negotiations were intense. Local tax laws were complicated, land was expensive, and France needed serious money to make this dream happen. At one point, the budget jumped from $1.5 million to $6 million. That's over $58 million in today's money. Here's what made this project so crazy. They were planning a 2.5-mile track with banking steeper than Daytona, designed for speeds over 200 miles per hour. Nobody had ever built anything like this before. In 1968, Alabama gave France 2,000 acres at the site of the former Anniston Air Force Base. On May 16, 1968, France officially announced the project. 7 days later, they broke ground on what would become Alabama International Motor Speedway. But building the track was just the beginning. The real chaos started when they actually tried to race on it. September 14, 1969. This date should have been a celebration. Instead, it became one of the most dramatic disasters in NASCAR history. The track was finished, sort of. The racing surface was complete, but everything else was basically held together with duct tape and prayers. VIP suites were unfinished, amenities were bare bones, and the track's surface was rough as sandpaper. When drivers showed up for practice, they immediately knew something was wrong. Buddy Baker tested tires and said they wouldn't stand up if you hit a chuck hole at 200 miles per hour. Tires were getting shredded after just 4 laps. Firestone actually pulled out of the event entirely because their tires couldn't handle the track. The newly formed Professional Drivers Association held a meeting with 36 drivers. They told France the track was too dangerous and asked him to postpone the race. France's response? Absolutely not. He'd spent millions building this place, and a postponement would probably bankrupt him. He told the drivers to just race slower. The drivers said no way. That's when things got physical. Leroy Yarborough actually punched France after France called him too scared to race. almost every major driver except Tiny Lund and Bobby Isaac withdrew from the event. So what do you do when you've got a race scheduled and no drivers? If you're Bill France Sr., you get creative. France wasn't about to let a little thing like having no drivers stop his big debut. He went out and found non-union drivers, Grand American drivers, and basically anyone willing to risk their life on his dangerous track. He even let smaller pony cars with less power run in the Cup Series race. Chrysler was supposed to debut their winged Dodge Charger Daytona with Bobby Allison driving. When Allison walked out, they replaced him with Richard Brickhouse, a guy nobody had heard of. The race actually happened, and somehow Brickhouse won. The crowd of 64,000 was lower than expected, but France had pulled off the impossible. He'd held a NASCAR Cup Series race with basically no Cup Series drivers. Of course, runner-up Jim Vandiver accused NASCAR of rigging the race, but the protests went nowhere. You'd think after a disaster like opening day, things would calm down at Talladega. You'd be very, very wrong. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Talladega developed a reputation that went way beyond just being fast and dangerous. Weird stuff kept happening, stuff that didn't make sense. Jim Hunter, the track's publicity director, started promoting something he called the Talladega Curse. His story? The track was built on sacred Native American land, taken during the Trail of Tears, and the spirits weren't happy about it. Now, you might think this was just marketing nonsense, but then you look at what actually happened at the track, and it gets pretty hard to explain. In 1973, Larry Smith became the first driver to die at Talladega when he hit the wall after a tire blowout. In the same race, Bobby Isaac, a tough-as-nails veteran, suddenly pulled into the pits and retired from racing completely. His reason? He said voices in his head told him to quit. At the 1974 Winston 500, 10 of the top 11 qualified cars reported that someone had sabotaged their vehicles. Various mechanical failures knocked out almost every favorite. They never found who did it. In 1975, both pit crew member Randy Owens and driver Tiny Lund were killed in separate incidents. But the really weird stuff was just getting started. By the 1980s, Talladega had gained a reputation for attracting the strangest characters in racing. In 1982, a guy named L.W. Wright showed up, claiming to be a legitimate race team. This con artist somehow managed to steal thousands of dollars worth of equipment from Sterling Marlin, Goodyear, and even NASCAR itself. Wright actually attempted to qualify for the Winston 500. When he was too slow and got parked during the race, he simply vanished without a trace. Despite a manhunt, nobody could find him. He wasn't discovered until 2022, 40 years later, when he agreed to reveal himself for a podcast. But that wasn't even Talladega's most bizarre incident. In 1986, a spectator named Darren Crowder somehow broke into the race's safety car and took it for a joyride around the track during the actual race. Longtime NASCAR journalist Steve Wade called it Talladega's most bizarre incident. And then came the crash that changed everything. May 3rd, 1987. This is the date that Talladega became truly legendary, but for all the wrong reasons. Bobby Allison was running in the Winston 500 when his tire blew in the front stretch at nearly 200 miles per hour. His car went airborne, not just a little hop, but full airplane mode, and crashed into the protective catch fence. 4 spectators were injured when debris came flying into the grandstands. It was a miracle that nobody was killed. But here's what made this crash so significant. It scared NASCAR so badly that they immediately implemented restrictor plates to slow down the cars. This wasn't just a rule change, it completely transformed how racing worked at Talladega. The unintended consequence? Slower speeds led to pack racing, where cars run in tight groups. And pack racing led to something Talladega became famous for: massive multi-car crashes called the Big One. Once restrictor plates were mandated, Talladega became NASCAR's version of Russian roulette. In 1993, the die-hard 500 had not one, but two separate major accidents. The first was a 7-car crash that left Stanley Smith with a basilar skull fracture that affected him for life. Jimmy Horton's car went over the protective wall, the first time that had happened since 1969. Later in the same race, Neil Bonnett's car went airborne and tore a 20-foot gap in the catch fence. The crashes just kept getting bigger. In 2002, the Aaron's 312 had a 27-car pileup that set an all-time record for most cars involved in a single NASCAR incident. The Cup Series race that same year had a 24-car accident. In 2003, they tied the record with another 27-car crash. But the scariest moment came in 2009, when Carl Edwards' car went airborne on the final lap and crashed into the catch fence, injuring 7 spectators. It was Bobby Allison's 1987 crash all over again. Through all this chaos, Talladega somehow kept growing. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, the track kept expanding. By 2003, the place could seat 143,000 people, making it one of the largest sports venues in America. The infield became legendary for its party atmosphere. It was like Woodstock meets Mardi Gras with racing mixed in. By the peak years, close to 200,000 people would show up for race weekends. The place was an absolute madhouse. But like everything else at Talladega, what goes up eventually comes crashing down. The Great Recession hit Talladega hard. Attendance dropped from nearly 200,000 to around 100,000. In 2013, track officials demolished the massive backstretch grandstands and cut capacity down to 80,000. But the track's reputation for chaos hasn't dimmed. Even in recent years, they've had controversies like the 2020 noose incident with Bubba Wallace, which turned out to be a garage door pull rope but created a massive FBI investigation. Today, Talladega is still NASCAR's wildest track. Whether you believe in the Talladega curse or you just think the place attracts chaos naturally, one thing is certain: there's no other track like it in the world. What's your craziest Talladega memory? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to Track Reactions, your source for all the stories on and off the track. We'll see you at the track.